This is the 4th year we have done quarterly presentations of interest to both young adults, teens, and adults in the community. We've had a Holocaust survivor. We had 2 of the original Freedom Riders from the Trailways, Greyhound bus rides in the 60s. We had a man who served 35 years in prison for a crime he did not commit and was finally released with DNA evidence through the Innocence Project. We do college planning. I hope you will come to the next 2 events we have. The one in November is we hope to have some World War II veterans. Those are quickly leaving us because the war has been over for quite some time, of course, now. And then in November, we're doing something called Give Peace a Chance. There's so much division in the world, and our vision for this is to have a panel that includes an imam, a rabbi, a priest, a Protestant minister, and probably someone from the Hindu faith to talk about those things that are common to us as opposed to those things that divide us. We are also going to ask them the foundations of some of their dress, for example, or some of those things that people find confusing or may have questions about. So if you put your email address down there on the page, I will send you the notes from Mr. Rogenbaum's presentation as well as post it on our Facebook page, but I will also invite you to both of those presentations, and then who knows what we'll do next year. So I'm especially pleased that we have young people in the audience tonight. You are very important. You are my future. And sometimes life is hard, and lots of people feel that way. If you're struggling and you feel like you're the only one, I promise you you're not. And I promise you there's help out there. And one of my goals, this is the 2nd public presentation we've done on this topic, and the 3rd time we've done it totally. The first time we did it just for my youth corps members and their parents. There is no shame in asking for help. There is no age at which you're supposed to be able to do it all. I am old. I'm not going to tell you how old, because a woman does not reveal her age. But I can't do it by myself. I know what I know, and I know what I don't know. And I think it is wisdom when you seek out that person to fill in the blanks where you don't know. So no shame, none. I also think there may be some people in the audience for whom this topic is very personal, who may have had personal experience with these topics. So if emotions become too much, please feel free to step outside the room. Compose yourself, and we would welcome you back. But if that is uncomfortable for you, we will understand. So tonight is about hope and resources. It's about sharing information that I hope you will take beyond this room and share with friends and families and other young people. So now I'm going to turn it over to one of the 3 members of the Mayor's Youth Leadership Council that put this together, and that is Pranjal Tyagi, and he will get the program started.
Good evening, and thank you for attending this event. The panelists we have lined up for this evening are professionals who have dealt extensively with the issues of depression and suicide prevention. Our first speaker tonight will be Dr. Aranda, a licensed psychologist, followed by Professor Steve Rogenbaum from USF, and our final speaker will be Mr. Tom Mueller from the Crisis Center of Tampa. I'd like to now welcome Dr. Aranda.
Good evening. As Pranjal just mentioned to you, my name is Dr. Maria Aranda. I'm a licensed psychologist. I have a private practice here in Tampa. Been in private practice for approximately 10 years, and prior to that, I worked at Pinellas County Schools as an independent contractor. So overall, 20 years working just with kids. Aside from that, I have 3 daughters, 2 of them who are teens. So anything that I did not learn in graduate school or in my job, I've been thoroughly schooled by my teenagers. And what I want to talk to you for just a little bit is the state of mental health in the teenage years, okay? And this talk is mainly addressed to to the teens in the audience. I'm glad you're here. The teenage years, they've always been a little tricky, right? You've heard it before. There's so many changes socially, biologically, emotionally. You got the hormones going, all in a very short period of time. So you've heard that before, but the experience of being a teenager has really changed in the last 30 to 40 years for many reasons that are perhaps beyond the scope of this talk. But one example of how things have changed in the last 20, 30 years is that since the year 2000, teens are twice as likely to come from a divorced home. And that makes things a little bit harder. So now you have to juggle everything you have to juggle, and you have two homes, or maybe there's some fighting in the home. Things are harder. It's one example of how things have changed in the last 20 to 30 years. And then on top of that, you all know that there's a lot of pressure right now to succeed in many, many fronts. You have to succeed academically. You have to manage all of those extracurriculars. A lot of you play sports, and not just on one team. You have your school team, and then you have your club team, and you're traveling. That's a lot of time. And you have to manage your friends, and your parents are nagging you that they don't see you enough, and you don't spend time with them, and you have to make time with your friends. And if you're applying to college or you're thinking about college, now you're hearing all of this stuff about having a passion and developing your passion and leadership and go start a nonprofit. I know teens who have started a nonprofit. I never started a nonprofit when I was 16. So there's a lot of pressure. Oh, and on top of it, there's that whole digital world that requires time and attention. It is a world that you have to monitor your presence and be active in. So it's just more time. And then on top of all of that, there's that, 7 and 8 hours of sleep you're supposed to get every night, which probably most of you don't get. So all of that can come with a price. It can come with a price. So for the teenagers here, I want you to, if you are 18 or younger, I want you to raise your hand. Just raise your hand if you know 20 people your age. Okay? 20 people your age. It could be people can't raise your hand, sorry. People at school, in your neighborhood, okay? So mostly all of you. Okay, you know 20 people. All right. Of those 20 people, I'm here to tell you that 4 of them, approximately 4 of those 20 people, I want you to picture them in your mind, give them names, look at their faces in your mind. 4 of those 20 people, of those 20 friends, have a diagnosable mental health condition. It's 4 out of the 20. So what does that mean? That doesn't necessarily mean they've been diagnosed, but if they were to go to a psychologist, their struggles would be diagnosable. And it's not that they're just feeling a little sad or anxious. They are presenting with a constellation of behaviors and symptoms that they would get a diagnosis, okay? And you might be thinking, well, wait a minute, who are those 4? Maybe you know one person who's in treatment, that they see a therapist, and let me just say, you might be one of those 4, okay? But you're thinking, why don't I know who they are? Well, we know why we don't know who they are. Teens don't talk about this. You're afraid to be teased, shame. Kids will say, you're going to go see your shrink. Teens don't talk about this. And on top of it, some teens may not know that they are struggling with a mental health disorder. They know that they don't feel well, that things aren't going well, that things are maybe going downhill, but they haven't quite put a name to this. They're not aware that they are struggling with a mental health disorder, so there's an awareness part to it. So when I was thinking about this talk, I know that you're not going to remember everything that I talk about and everything that I say, so I wanted to sort of boil down what I want you to remember from my talk. And it's 3 things, just 3 things. And the first one is that if you are one of those 4, you are not alone. Because out of those 20 kids, there are 4 of you. And in the next group of 20, there are 4 more. So if you don't feel well, if you feel like your life is kind of getting out of control, you are not alone. So that's the first thing that I'd like for you to remember. So what might those 4 teens in that group of 20, what might they be struggling with? We're going to talk a lot about depression, so that's obviously one, but there's also, so I kind of call it the big 5. It's depression, anxiety, eating disorders, substance abuse, and then attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder with learning disabilities. Those are all sort of the learning issues. So depression, anxiety, eating disorders, substance abuse, and learning disabilities with ADHD. So if you're not one of those people struggling with that, you might think, well, how bad can this be? What does this mean? It's hard to perhaps understand this if you've never experienced a mental health condition. That makes sense. So I kind of wanted to walk you through a day in the life of a teen with a mental health problem. And some of this, you might recognize some of this. But a mental health disorder, it makes everything harder, everything. From the moment you have to wake up, that alarm goes off at 6, it will be hard to wake up. It will be hard to wake up on time, right? It will be hard to get yourself ready to get to school on time because maybe you have these rituals that take 1 hour to make sure that everything looks perfect. So getting out that door is very difficult. Then you have to go downstairs and you have to eat breakfast. You might not have an appetite you don't want to eat. And then that might then cause a problem with your parents who want you to eat, right? It's not even 7 o'clock, okay? You get to school, you manage to get to school on time. It is first period, and that teacher's talking. It will make concentrating harder. It will make remembering what the teacher is saying harder, reading, writing, remembering what you got to bring for homework. Now it's maybe 8 o'clock. I mean, I'm exhausted thinking of all of this. You still have second and third and fourth period. Then you got to manage lunch. And that cafeteria is a little crazy. You have all these, you might feel irritable at this point. You haven't eaten. Remember, we didn't eat breakfast. And the cafeteria is loud and it's just too much. So you have to maintain your calm. You don't want to have an outburst. You don't want to be grumpy or irritable. So you got to manage lunch. And then you have to manage 3 more classes. And then before going home, you have to remember, right, everything you need to bring home, what you have to bring home, what you have to do. A mental health condition will make that harder to do your homework when you get home. If you have extracurriculars, maybe you don't want to go to those anymore. You used to like it, now you don't. So now you have another argument with your mom. Why aren't you going to soccer? Maybe you just want to go and sleep till the next day, right? Because you didn't really sleep well the night before, so you're really, really tired. And you still have that, nagging homework you have to do. A mental health disorder makes everything harder, okay? So then you get to nighttime. Maybe you slept for 3-4 hours. Now you're not going to bed till maybe 12 or 1 o'clock, and then you have to get up at 6, 5 hours of sleep. That's not going to help you. And then we repeat that cycle over and over. A mental health condition makes everything harder, and it doesn't have to be that way, okay? So how would you know then? How would you know, am I one of those 4 people? How do you know if you have a problem, okay? And so I want to just kind of give you a rundown of maybe some warning signs that if this is happening to you, it could be that it's an indication that something's happening. And these are not just for depression, but for the big 5 that I was talking about. And I do have this in a handout at the back of it's in the back of the room, if you'd like it. So some of the warning signs that maybe you're one of those 4, okay? You can't eat or sleep, okay? You can't do regular tasks like going to school on time and getting ready on time, just regular daily tasks. You don't want to do things you used to enjoy. You used to enjoy all these things. Now you have no energy or desire to do them. You don't want to hang out with your friends. You want to just stay home and watch Netflix all day. Binge watch all day, every day, when you used to like to go out. You have no energy, just want to sleep. You feel hopeless, or you feel numb. You don't feel anything. Or you're angry a lot, or irritable a lot. I mean, we all get angry, we all get irritable. It's just, you feel this way every day. Those are warning signs. If you want to harm yourself, obviously, and we'll talk more about that. And then this one doesn't necessarily pop up on many people's radar, but if you are having difficulty stopping yourself from dieting or exercising a lot, and if you've decided that your life would be better on a diet of 600 calories or less, That's going to be a problem. That's going to be a problem. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. And then the one that I added to this list is from girlshealth.gov, but if you are cutting yourself, that's a problem. And sometimes kids will say to me, well, I'm cutting myself. I just didn't feel good. I was upset. I did not want to die. It's not a suicidal gesture. Okay. It's still a problem. And then sometimes other kids will say, but I didn't use a knife. I didn't use scissors. I used a paper clip. Okay, it's still a problem. And the reason it is a problem is because when you start cutting to feel better, it can become addicting. It takes on an addictive property. So that then you have to do it again, and you have to do it more, and then you have to do it more often, and that is not a good road to go down. And there are some studies that are indicating that, so of your 20 friends that you were picturing in your mind, that perhaps up to 7 to 8 of them have cut in the past. That's a very high number. So if you are cutting yourself or self-harming yourself in any shape or form, that is a big red flag. So remember the 3 things I was hoping that you remember from this talk. The first one, that you're not alone. There's four in that group of 20. And the second thing is that if you are struggling, it likely has a name. And this sounds really cheesy, but if you can name it, you can tame it. If you can put it out into the world of words, you are one step closer to understanding what you're struggling with and managing it and kind of getting your head wrapped around it. You have to put it into the world of words. So it probably has a name. That's the second thing I'd like for you to remember. And many times anxiety is the name of what might be ailing a teen. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about anxiety because after depression, it's probably one of the most prevalent things that we're seeing in our society, in adults and teens and little kids as well. There's normal anxiety. It's a normal emotion. And it's a good thing to have a little bit of anxiety. In little doses, it's great. So I had prepared for this talk, right? And Steve called me yesterday and kind of happened to mention there might be 100 to 120 people here. And I got a little bit of anxiety, which was good because it made me prepare a little bit better. I thought it might be 30 people. So I had a little bit of anxiety, but it was adaptive. It was helpful. It kind of, raised my game there a little bit. If I would have had too much anxiety, it would not have been helpful. A panic attack would not have been helpful yesterday. A little bit of anxiety is good. So I want kids to have a little bit of anxiety. And in prehistoric times, anxiety helped us stay alive. If there was a tiger coming at you, and I would want you to have anxiety because anxiety kicks in your sympathetic nervous system and you run and you are alive. So anxiety can be life-saving. The problem is that nowadays we really don't have tigers that are coming at us. But many people think that they do. So anxiety is a problem of imaginary tigers and too much anxiety. So an example of what I'm saying is, so let's say you have this incredible fear of flying. You will not get on an airplane. You will drive to Yosemite rather than get on an airplane. This is a problem because you're seeing that airplane as a tiger. That airplane is going to harm you and you will die. That's your tiger. I used to see a little girl who was deathly afraid of going to the bathroom in a public place because she was afraid that if she locked the door would get stuck, nobody would remember that she was in there, and she would die. So that bathroom was her tiger. So that anxiety in small doses is okay, but when it's too much and when it's about things that more than likely are not going to happen, then it's a problem. And there's many different kinds of anxiety. They're like cousins. They're all related, but they're different. And so I just talked a little bit about phobias. It's just intense fear of different things. But there's also the worriers, generalized anxiety, and that is those kids who are worrying all the time about many things. And it is exhausting. They live in the future. A lot of what they say to themselves is, what if, what if, what if? And many times those things don't happen. They don't happen, but there's a lot of mental energy and time going into that. And the problem with anxiety is that because it's so exhausting, it can lead to depression. At some point, you cannot sustain that lifestyle, and you will fall into a depression. Now you have 2 things that are going on. So it needs to be treated. So I talked about worry, phobias, there's panic attacks. I think it's when many times panic attacks are, you end up in the ER because you think you're having a heart attack. You're not having a heart attack. You're having a panic attack and you feel like you can't breathe, choking. So there's panic attack, and then obsessive compulsive disorder. Many people know a little bit about that. Hand washing, those are sort of the common kinds of examples. Checking lights a lot. But it can be a little more complicated than that. You can have OCD without having the behavior. So a lot of it is, you can have obsessive thoughts that are just going over and over and over. So you might not be washing your hands or checking the lights or the stove, but you can still have a diagnosis of OCD, and it just makes you stuck. You can't go anywhere until, well, that repetition's done maybe 50, 60 times, so it can be a significant problem. And I think that's it in terms of anxiety. So that's just a little bit of an overview on anxiety, its relationship to depression. Many times those two things go hand in hand. Remember the three things I wanted you to remember? So here's the third. The first one was that you're not alone. The second one, it probably has a name. And then the third one is that there is help available. There is help available. Of those 4 to 5 students that you pictured in your mind when I first started talking, probably only 1 to 2 of them are getting help. The other 2 are not getting help. And treatment helps, but it will help a little bit more or a little bit faster if you can initiate treatment before, as soon as the symptoms start. The more you wait, the harder it can be, especially with eating disorders. Eating disorders can be lethal. Anorexia is not something that you want in your house. And if you catch that early, and early I mean, kids at 11 and 12 are already starting to do normal dieting. That's how many times it'll start, a normal diet, and then it just starts getting out of hand a little bit, and then we have an eating disorder. If you catch it early at 12, 13, 14, you can nip it in the bud pretty quickly. Many times those kids end up needing residential treatment if it's gone untreated for many years. So there is treatment, there is help. And for those of you going to college, or college might be a year or 2 away, good mental health away from home starts at home. So that day in the life of a teen, right? I was a teenager in high school. Okay, if you're in college, that's going to be a lot harder because there's just a lot more coming at you. You're on your own. You don't have that comfort of home. So good mental health away from home starts at home. Okay, so the 3 things are: you're not alone, it probably has a name, and there is help available. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
I have this, so it may help. Good evening. I'm Steve Rogenbaum. I'm from the University of South Florida. Can everybody hear me? Okay, good. I wanted to, as a professor, I heard a phone go off. So everybody who has a cell phone? If you could raise your cell phone real quick, if you have one. I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. I'm going to ask you to put a phone number in there for me right now. 1-800-273-8255. 1-800-273-8255. That's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. That number is available to anybody who's concerned about themselves or anybody who's concerned about somebody else, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, anywhere in the USA, and the phone call will be answered by a trained helper to help you, again, whether you're concerned about yourself or you're concerned about your friend, your child, your neighbor, family member, or anybody. So everyone has that. That'll be on a slide later. Again, as a professor, I kind of like visual aids, so hopefully that'll help us speed through this and help reinforce some of the information. There will be no test later. I will not give an exam, so we're good on that. So but there's the title, Suicide Prevention for Parents and Adolescents. So I hope to address both audiences. So we hear a lot of things, whether it's on the internet, whether it is from friends, whether it's in the news, whether it's on television, or whether it's from our neighbors. Sometimes we hear information that's true, and sometimes we hear information that's not quite exactly accurate. So part of this presentation is to help dispel some of those myths. So first thing is, of the people that die by suicide, 9 out of 10 have a diagnosable mental health condition. Dr. Aranda talked about some of the mental health conditions that were common, but of those that die by suicide, 90%, or 9 out of 10, have a diagnosable mental health condition. So it's not common for everybody. And as Dr. Aranda pointed out, very few are getting treatment. So you can see the little stick figures. I did not draw those, by the way, so although they look much better than what I would draw. So. And as Dr. Aranda also said, diagnosable mental health conditions are fairly common. They occur more than we think. According to a 2010 study, as many as just under 50% have some type of diagnosable mental health condition. However, closer to 4 out of 20, or 20%, have a serious disorder that impairs functioning in one of their daily living activity areas, school, home, community. You can see some of those that are listed. Mood disorders being the top one, anxiety disorders, is the most prevalent, and then mood disorders. So you can see some of those listed. Hopefully, if you can't read those, you can get a copy of those if you'd like, and they can be sent to you. The more serious ones, again, mood disorders, anxiety disorders, and behavioral disorders are the most common. So of all the people, picture the circle as everybody having a mental health issue. So it's a pretty big circle. And that happens. It happens a lot. Lots of people have diagnosable mental health conditions. This is a circle, a much smaller circle, that is representative of those that die by suicide. Much, much smaller. Suicide, as you see here, is by a much smaller circle, is a rare event. Does not happen often. Statistically rare. Now, I can't say that to a family who's lost a loved one, because although it's a low frequency, it's a very high impact event. Tragic for the family, for the neighbors, for the church or house of faith, for the school, for the community. So the ripples go on and on. So while it may be low frequency, it has seriously high impact. But it is rare, statistically speaking. So if we superimpose that little circle over the big one, there's the overlap. 90% of that small circle that die by suicide have a diagnosable mental health condition. But of the big circle of those that have a mental health condition, very few will ever die by suicide. Okay? So that's, I think, an important piece to know. So prevention, whether I have a map of Florida just because we're in Florida, is often somebody being in the right place at the right time with the right knowledge. So you're here tonight, you're in the right place. Hopefully the three of us are going to present you with some information that you can leave here with that'll help you be a helping person that can be that person at the right place at the right time for somebody else. Because where do people go to get help? We know from this graph, the big takeaway from this graph is that most people, unfortunately, don't go to Dr. Aranda's office first. They go to family and friends initially. So family and friends are the first line of defense. If I have a problem, I probably go to my parents or my brother or my sister first. So I might talk to a family or a friend. So that's just the point of this. So we are all family and friends, so we want to be prepared. So I want to talk for a few minutes tonight about what to look for, what to do if we see some of those warning signs or risk factors, and how to help. So we're going to review quickly some of the protective factors. What's a protective factor? Those things that are strengths or skills that we have that help us overcome challenges. Risk factors that may make us more predisposed to not doing so well when we have challenges, and warning signs when we're struggling a little bit, and warning signs that we can recognize to reach out for somebody who may be at higher risk, in this case for depression or suicide prevention. So some of the protective factors are positive connections to school, good coping or problem-solving skills, the ability to ask for help when needed, and the availability and accessibility of appropriate care. You can read some of the others here, but these are strengths that we can build on in any relationship for somebody who may be struggling a little bit. At the same time, there are some risk factors that adolescents experience that may put them at a slightly higher risk. So we've talked about mental disorders. There are a few listed there. A previous suicide attempt is a risk factor for higher risk for future suicide. Social isolation, limited access to mental health care, poor problem solving, or some challenges in the family environment. Easy access or ready access to lethal beings, repeated engagement or exposure to violence, certain cultural or religious beliefs sometimes is a risk factor, undertreated or untreated suicidal behavior, for example, a previous suicide attempt, exposure to suicide of a peer, or being a minority youth. So all of those are risk factors. Those are things that we pretty much can't change if we've already been exposed to something. That's kind of something that we carry with us. So these are risk factors. Again, the protective factors help us deal with the risk factors, but the risk factors make us slightly more vulnerable. So what happens if we start to see something because of those risk factors? What are we looking for? We're looking for youth that are talking about or making plans for suicide, expressing hopelessness about the future. I talked to some of the students here. They've sent numerous applications out to college. I think they're like thinking about the future left and right. So, but if someone's not thinking about the future, they're not making plans, they're expressing hopelessness. Overwhelming emotional pain or distress. Things that really are different than what is typical for the youth. So worrisome behavioral cues or marked changes in behavior. Something out of character for your child, your neighborhood, your child's neighborhood friend or classmate, or your own friend. So what are some of those cues? Withdrawal from connection. Dr. Aranda did a great job of explaining some of these in different language, so if we say them different ways, sometimes that may resonate with different people in the audience. Changes in sleep, either way too much or not enough. Dramatic changes typically meaning lasting 2 weeks or longer for some of these changes. Not just one bad night of sleep, but struggling for 2 weeks or more to get sleep or sleeping too much. Anger or hostility that seems out of character, out of context. Again, not just one incident, but a pattern has developed. Or recent increased agitation or irritability. So all of these are little red flags that we should pay attention to if we see them in our own children, our friends, our neighborhood, the neighborhood kids that may spend time at our own home. So I have a slide specifically for parents. So what do we look for in our own children? What should I pay attention to? Again, talking about wanting to die, to be dead, or about suicide. Or are they cutting themselves? Sometimes we don't know all of these, but we may know some of these pieces of the puzzle. So if any of these are red flags that we should pay attention to for our own children, our own family. Expressing feelings that things may not seem to be getting better, that hopelessness that we talked about. Or that they're in terrible emotional pain, something's really wrong, they can't put their finger on it exactly, but it doesn't seem to be going away. Or there's been a recent loss, so a significant loss that they're really struggling with and don't seem to be able to be bouncing back from in a reasonable time. Grief is common, but excessive struggling with that could be a red flag. Not all red flags are an indication of somebody being at risk for suicide. We're going to talk about how to intervene, how to ask questions, how to kind of make that determination. Trust your gut as a parent. You think something's not just right, maybe it's not. Maybe we need to address that red flag. So those are the three that I would encourage parents to kind of pay attention to and pay attention to for their own children in particular. So we reviewed just briefly what to look for. Now we're going to look at what to do. We've broken down what to do into three basic steps. One fish, blue fish, or one fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish, right? Dr. Seuss. So the three basic steps are show you care, ask the question, and get help. So we have a goal if we're going to intervene, what to do if we notice these red flags, we see somebody struggling, whether it's our own child or a friend of ours. So our goal is to get through the crisis without harm for ourselves or for the individual at risk. We want to listen, we want to establish a rapport, want to do some type of quick assessment and kind of a quick assessment about impending lethality. So show your care. What does that mean? Well, I don't think I need to show or talk to most of you about how to show caring actions. So trust your judgment. How do you typically show you care to your friends or your children? Be genuine. Share your concerns. So saying things like, I've noticed that you've been getting up in the middle of the night repeatedly over the last couple of weeks. So I've noticed that that's something, and that you're talking now about not wanting to play soccer anymore, and you used to love soccer. I'm really concerned. What's going on? So you want to approach the issue by making observations, making it kind of objective. You're not just saying, oh, what's wrong, but describing why you're concerned. Your concern can actually alleviate the fears of the adolescent who may be struggling a little bit and say, oh, finally, somebody's asked me. Nobody's ever asked me about this before. Using reflective listening is a great skill. So just saying, so it sounds like what you're saying is that Johnny called you or broke up with you over text message, and then an Instagram photo went somewhere, and then you got cut from the soccer team? No, that's not what I said. I said this. Or, yes, that's exactly what I said. So it gives you an opportunity to kind of show that you're listening and to reflect back what you think you heard, and for the child to tell you, in fact, if that is what you heard. Spend time looking for the picture. So we should listen is probably the key element at the bottom. Listen is capital letters. So what's the saying? We have one mouth but two ears, so we should listen twice as often as we speak. So I have a little bit of bad news, and that's that I can't tell you exactly what to say. There's no script. Can't give you exactly the words that everybody can say, because it's not going to be the same for everybody. But what is the good news is that it's probably not as essential that you have exactly the words that you need, but that you're reaching out, you're expressing concern, and you're demonstrating your caring attitude and caring nature towards your child or towards another friend. So your genuine concern is probably the most important thing or the key element. The question. I'm going to suggest that you ask directly about suicide. Don't assume it's not my child, it's not my friend. Then don't assume that they're not the suicidal type. Be direct. State the observations. Sounds like you're thinking of killing yourself. Are you thinking of suicide? You can be that direct. Research suggests that if you say that, or you ask directly about suicide, that you are not planting the idea. And there's several studies to support that. You're not placing the idea in the adolescent's head if you ask them about suicide. If they're not thinking about it, chances are they'll say, no, I would never do that, or no, I'm not thinking about that. Or if they are, they'll say, yes, I am. But you're not influencing that by asking them. You're not doing that. In fact, chances are that you're giving them permission to talk about something that they've been struggling with without being able to talk to anybody else about it. You don't have to solve all the problems. You don't have to be the solution, but by being empathetic, by listening, by showing you're caring, that can sometimes stem the tide for somebody who's struggling and may be hopeless at some point. The last part of that is that you should not be the only person that knows that. You can get help. Everyone who had a cell phone has that number in their cell phone now. You can call that if you're concerned about somebody else, or you can call that if you're concerned about yourself. So 1-800-273-8255. That's a lifeline that you have available. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, say it again. Right. So let me repeat the question. You tell me if I got it right. So if you ask the question, are you not planting the idea? Is that what you're asking? No, what? I'm sorry? Oh, offending. It's possible that you may offend somebody, but I would rather offend somebody and save a life than avoid offending somebody and having somebody who's not with us anymore. Chances are, if they're not thinking of suicide, but they're expressing concern, they're struggling, and they've exhibited some warning signs, chances are that they are struggling with something, and you say, well, I've noticed this, I've noticed you've trouble sleeping, you've experienced these kinds of issues, and you're talking about, you're expressing some hopelessness about things. Some people in that situation have sometimes thought about suicide. Are you thinking about suicide? No, I'm not thinking about suicide, or yes, I am. And if they are, it gives you a chance to reach out and intervene. We'll talk about that in the next step, what to do if somebody says yes. Did I address your question? Say it again.
So that sometimes you don't see those symptoms, like what you talk about.
Okay. So the question or the comment was, sometimes if we don't see the symptoms, we might not know to ask.
Sometimes, how can you ask the question?
Right. So that's a great question. So if I flip back, whoops. Yeah, so we talk about some of the things we see. If we see these things, then we would ask. We wouldn't just ask out of the clear blue sky. It's not it's time to go to bed, we're going to talk to our child and ask that question every night. But if we notice warning signs, the red flags, that's the time that we might intervene and ask. If we are concerned, we experience that discomfort in our gut, we have that gut feeling that something's not right, they're not acting like they normally are, then we may intervene and ask. If I haven't completely addressed that, let me come back to that during either the panel. I'm sure that Dr. Aranda has some great suggestions for that, and Tom Mueller also, and/or I'm happy to stay afterwards and talk with you more directly about that after the presentation. So again, the 3 Ps that I'm going to, Dr. Aranda had 3 ideas to remember. I'm going to have 3 Ps. Parents, it's okay to talk to your child about suicide. Again, you're not planting the idea. Peers, getting help from an adult is okay. We may not be the coolest people. I'm not the coolest person in the world, but I know how to help sometimes. So asking an adult for help is wonderful. And if we have any principals or school administrators here, asking about suicide does not cause suicide, does not increase the risk for your school. So it's okay to ask. So we've asked the question, and perhaps they've said yes. So we're talking now about, we've talked about what to look for, what to do, which included show you care, ask the question, get help. Now we're going to cover that a little more specifically with how to get help. So let them know that they're not alone. Dr. Aranda drove home that point earlier, and that you'll help them get the help you need. You can call that Lifeline number together, or you can engage in some other activities as well. Reaching out can make the difference between life and death, so it's important to reach out. If you suspect that somebody's in imminent risk or in crisis, try not to leave them alone if you can safely stay with them. Again, you can make that phone call together, whether it's a friend or somebody else, but also you want to make sure that you reach out and tell somebody else. You don't want to be the only person that knows that, or the only person responsible for helping. There's lots of helpers in our community. Mr. Rogers, anyone know who Mr. Rogers is? The guy with the sweater on television? Used to say, when there were pictures of disasters, always look for helpers. You can always find helpers in the picture. So there's always helpers around. So there are lots of resources around. There are lots of helpers. We have friends and family who can be very supportive. We have clergy, mental health agencies, counselors. Our family doctor can be a resource. The local ER room is a potential resource. Calling 911 in a crisis or an emergency can be a life-saving phone call. 211 in Hillsborough County and surrounding areas is an excellent information referral and resource and referral line, which I think Mr. Mueller is going to talk about a little bit later. And then the 1-800-273-8255 number, available to anybody in the country 7 days a week. Some other resources. There are local coalitions for suicide prevention, as well as the Florida Suicide Prevention, which is a statewide coalition. The National Alliance on Mental Illness have local chapters all over the state. And then there are several hotlines that you can call, including a parent helpline, that you might want to put that in speed dial. But lots of numbers that you can jot down or get a copy of at the end. For teens, I am not a texter, but those of you that are, here's a text line, 741-741, to start the text, and then text start to start, and a trained, compassionate listener will intervene. So you didn't even have to make a phone call, you can text them. So what about the home situation? So if we have a firearm in the home, safe access, safe storage can help save a life, putting one kind of extra barrier between easy access to a lethal means. So free gun locks are available, and we can find at that website local resources, which typically in Hillsborough County include the County Sheriff's Office and the Tampa Police Department. Just phone them and ask them if they have them, and you can pick one up. Additionally, oftentimes we have extra medication that we haven't quite finished, or we have extra medication lying around in our home. There's appropriate ways to get rid of that extra medication, again, eliminating easy access to lethal means in our homes. So they can be dropped off. There's a April 30th emphasis national campaign to return medication, or again, the drop-off points in Hillsborough are the police department and sheriff's offices. And so they will take those medications, dispose of them properly. Try not to flush them. That ends up in our water supply, and that's not a good thing. So, in summary, we've reviewed what to look for that included the protective factors, the risk factors, and the warning signs, those red flags that raise the hair on the back of our necks. What to do: show your care, ask the question, and get help. And then how to help, I've tried to provide you with a couple resources that you have at your ready to help you intervene with family, friends, or somebody you're concerned about. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rogenbaum, for that informative presentation. I'd now like to call up our last speaker for this evening before we move to the panel, Mr. Tom Mueller from the Crisis Center.
Well, good evening, everyone. I guess I can't do anything with it. Can you hear me in the back? Okay, good. Because I wanted to review a couple of quick things, and there are some handouts at the back of the room that I left. One is a full page, talks about how to help someone, and it's another way to say some of the things our other speakers did. It talks about especially non-judgmental communication, not blaming, not accusing, not labeling, but listening to the person and hearing what they have to say. It also, on one side, has a safety planning tool. If you happen to be in a situation where the person doesn't have access to mental health support, doesn't have a trusted other adult or other person to talk to, you can certainly talk to them about the things that will help them cope. In other words, there's lots of treatment options out there, but the reality is it's like a lot of other things. The more money you have, the more treatment options are open to you. And we know not everybody can afford the treatment. And sometimes there's quite a wait time until you can get to see a professional. Things like helplines can help fill that gap in between a wait line or a wait time. But the idea is we have a whole lot of other people who are concerned about this issue who can also be that buffer between the person, their struggles, and the time they can get to a professional. So there's some tips about how to do that directly, and there's also some things to think about. The safety plan talks about the first 3 or 4 things are things the person can do themselves to distract themselves from the current thoughts. One of the things we know about suicidal thinking is that those thoughts are very fleeting, the thoughts of taking that action. Thoughts about suicide that itself may not be as fleeting, but thoughts about taking the action are very fleeting. So if we can intervene while someone's focused on that action, that will often make all the difference. Many people say that after a couple hours, a day, a couple of days, they don't go back to those thoughts. So there's a very critical time when it's really important. But who knows when a person is feeling that bad or having those thoughts? Unfortunately, it's not your doctor, it's not your psychologist, it's not your psychiatrist, it's not the police, it's not your teacher, it's your family and friends. So what I want to do tonight is help you become the family and friend who can really do something meaningful at that time. We know there's a lot of hope when it comes to suicidal thinking and behavior, and I just want to give you a few short statistics around the concept of how hopeful this issue is. And hopefully this takes some of the fear away from dealing with this issue. So the numbers I'm referring to come from 2013. There were a little over 41,000 people in this country who took their life by suicide. Again, 90% of them mental health disorder, probably many of them were not getting treatment for that and did not have someone in their life who recognized those warning signs and had any clue about how to help someone in an appropriate way. During that same year, there were about 500,000 people who went to emergency departments for self-inflicted injury, not hitting their thumb with a hammer, purposeful injury that were suicide attempts. 500,000. But only 441,000 took their life. That means 460 didn't take their life. And not only that, researchers are telling us from people who've been there and talked about it and had lived experiences with these issues, that during the same year, there were 25 times as many people having serious thoughts of suicide as died by suicide. That puts that number at a little over 1 million people. Over 1 million people had serious thoughts of suicide and survived and got through. I think from our experience talking to people in our service who are suicidal callers, and by the way, our 211 number for Hillsborough County gets about 10,000 calls a month, and out of those calls, about 250 are about suicide. And guess what? There's not 250 people dying. And those are only the ones that reached out. There's lots of other people having those thoughts. We think, from our experience, the biggest difference is those people who end up taking their life were not well connected with a support system of caring and understanding people around them. They may have caring people, but people who did not understand what's the appropriate way to interact with someone who is feeling that bad. Once someone gets to the point of thinking about suicide and thinking about how they would do it, they've slipped way down a slope that's very difficult to climb back on their own. And that's certainly the critical time when people need help. Help is much easier to provide when a person first has those thoughts before they're getting to thoughts I actually taking action. So what I want to talk with you about are some of those tools. In the back, there are 211 cards, just a reminder. And by the way, we help people with any kind of human, family, individual-related issue with that service. There's a little card about the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. It's got a few reminders about, are you having trouble coping with some of these issues? And they're very similar to the ones that our other speakers talked about. Since we're focusing on teens especially, I wanted to mention another program we have. The flyer says Bent Not Broke. It's really called Healthy Transitions, and it's for people who are 16 to 24. How are they transitioning from youth to adulthood? There's lots of issues. One of the issues we know about that age group is, as we heard before, 4 out of 20 have a mental health condition. Well, guess what? If nobody noticed it, by the time you're in your mid-20s, it's probably going to get noticed. And if you haven't gotten help for it by then, it's going to be that much harder to find ways to cope with it. So that's when most mental health conditions become observable by others around them. So just a few tools for you to use. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time telling you about our suicide prevention line, how we follow up with callers, the services we provide, because we know there, again, are not enough helpers out there, and there's not enough other people who even realize there is a helpline they can call. But most of them have someone in their life who observed behavior and thought, that seems kind of odd. Well, I wonder if I should say something about that. Well, I'm not a professional. I don't know what to say. I don't want to say anything and make it worse. So let's focus on what you can say and what you can do. The way that we cope the best with suicide from our experience talking with suicidal individuals is getting people connected to someone else who's a good listener, someone else they trust and respect, and getting them to do some positive things, either distracting themselves by going with other people who are positive, doing things they enjoy, being around other people, going to people who are good listeners, going to counselors, calling hotlines. If we can encourage people to take positive steps, that takes time away from thinking about suicide. You know, it's a kind of a scale. We have so many heartbeats a day, we have so many breaths we take, we have so many thoughts, and if 80% of your day you're thinking about suicide, that's pretty heavy on that side of the scale. So if we can get people doing other things that distract them from those thoughts, other fun things when they're not thinking about suicide, all of a sudden we are increasing the level of hope in that person's life. What a cool thing to do. Increase hope in someone else's life. Hope heals suicide thinking. And the only way we get to that is by using the greatest skill the human brain has, and that is creative thinking. So I want to show you how easy it is and how good you are at doing that. That will help you interact with somebody else. So we're going to do a few activities because I'm not that great a talker anyway, so I'm going to turn it over to you. First thing we're going to do is a partner activity to show you how valuable and important and how good you feel when you connect with another human, okay? So this works a lot better if you stand, so please find a partner, stand up facing your partner, and find out whose birthday comes earlier in the calendar year. That's your first task. Then I'll tell you the next step. Oh, and by the way, this is a fun activity. Okay, I'm going to have you stop right there. The person whose birthday what comes later in the year gets to go first. And this is the mirror activity. That person is going to put their hands up like they're touching a glass mirror. Their partner is going to put their hands close to theirs but not touching them. The person whose birthday comes later is going to start moving gradually, and their partner is going to try to be their mirror image and follow their movements. Go. Okay, I'm going to ask you to stop right there. Now comes the part where you really have to dig deep. I'm going to challenge you to get really creative. Now it's the other person's turn to lead, but if your partner did that, you cannot do it. You got to do some different movements than your partner did. Go. Okay, just for the sake of time, I'm going to have you stop right there. I wish you could have seen this activity from my perspective, all the different ways that people were moving, the different things. You know, it was a very simple guideline, but it was very flexible, lots of ways to achieve that. And you were all challenged to do some creative thinking, come up with something new, different that had never been done before. And there was a lot of laughter. Creative thinking makes us feel good. Not only that, that's how the brain works at its optimal. That's the best way the brain functions. Creative thinking connects all kinds of parts of the brain. They have to work together. And when the body senses and the brain senses it's doing creative thinking, it goes, wow, do I feel good? This is perfect. This is the way it works. And the rest of the body works well too. Okay, we're not done. You know, you can stand or you can sit for this, still with your partner. That got your creative thinking going. It was a simple movement activity, but now we're going to put in place how you can actually converse in a way that, as our question talked about, how do you not make a person uncomfortable? How can you be non-judgmental? How can you get that person to explain what's going on? So here's what we're going to do. The person whose birthday comes earlier gets to go first this time. They are going to tell their partner a 1-minute story about something they did recently when they had fun, enjoyed, who was there, where they were, what they did, how come they enjoyed it, what was going on. Just 1 minute, okay? Something you enjoyed recently. And when that 1 minute is up, I'll let you know, and then I'll give the listener their instructions. Ready? Go. Okay, well, I see this is going well, but that's 1 minute. Time is up. Hate to cut you off, but of course it's easy to talk about something that went well, but here's the practice. Listeners out there, this is going to be your task. You're going to use something called open-ended or open-style questions. An open-style question doesn't usually have one-word answer. It might sometimes, but it's usually about opinions or attitudes or ideas. So let me give you a few examples of open-style questions. What was your favorite part of ... How did you feel when ... what happened after he fell off the skateboard. So questions that start with a statement that does not use the word why. No using the word why. It's the 3-letter word that's worse than the 4-letter words because it makes people judgmental. It makes people feel like they have to explain themselves. But if you say, how did you feel when they laughed at you when you fell off the skateboard? You're asking about someone's feelings. How many people in your sphere of influence that you see on a regular basis do you talk to about your emotions? I'll bet it's not many, but I'll bet it's the people who are important in your life. If you see somebody who seems out of character, who seems not to be themselves lately, you can say, I'm a little worried about you, Joe. You don't seem to be yourself. What's going on? Those are open-style questions. They can say anything they want to that. They can say, none of your business. And you go, whoa, geez, I'm surprised at you. Come on, there's got to be something going on. So you can press the issue or not. Okay, listeners, your task is to ask 3 different open-style questions about the story you just heard and see what kind of response you get. Go. Okay, I think some people have asked more than 3 questions. Okay, so now you had a chance to use language to feel that same joy of creativity that you did when you did the movement activity. You connected with someone. You were communicating with them in a non-judgmental way, in a way that said, I want to hear more about you. I want to know what your favorite part was. I want to know how you felt when. I want to know what you thought the other person was talking about. I want to know about you. You are important to me. You are a worthwhile human being. There isn't anything more important we can do for another human being than to show them that we think they're a worthwhile human being. Self-worth is one of the things that kind of goes out the window when people are having suicidal thoughts. And even if it doesn't have a dramatic change in a person by asking these kinds of questions, that lingers with them and stays in their mind, and it changes that scale of self-opinion, and they go, well, somebody was interested in me. Those are the tools used in cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, meditation, mindfulness, all the kinds of things that counselors and professionals will use. But now that you know what open-style questions are like and how they affect someone, people wouldn't stop the conversation. Again, people felt good. You showed interest in the other person. You got them to explain more. They got to sigh and get it out of their system. Same thing for a troubled person. They hear someone willing to say suicide to them, and they go, okay, here's my chance to talk about it. And they get it out of their system. When you use the open-style questions, you are the counselor. You are the caregiver. You are the person that brings hope into that person's life. I'd like to ask you to try to think of ways tonight, tomorrow, and the rest of this week to put open-style questions in the conversations you have about any ordinary thing so that they become routine, so that you become good at them, and you see how powerful they are. And I know what you're going to find out is other people are going to go, ooh, they're a pretty good listener. I'll go to them if I have difficulties or I have questions. I don't care if they solve them. I need someone to listen to me. Be that listener, be that helper, and use those open-style questions, and you will be doing the treatment for someone else. Thank you.